Alexandria. Ocasio-Cortez strode into the Senate chamber under the impression she would school the elderly white incumbents on progressive ideals. Louisiana Senator John Kennedy observed a former bartender holding an economics degree she barely comprehended, poised to champion policies with uncalculated financial tolls. He possessed merely 5 minutes for inquiries, yet she lacked any substantial rejoinders to offer him. The ensuing events would ultimately render her the most ridiculed legislator within the halls of Congress. The Senate Budget Committee had summoned her to testify regarding the Green New Deal, her hallmark legislation promising economic transformation and planetary salvation. She agreed to appear because she believed congressional testimony would bestow upon her a sense of gravity, distinguishing her as serious rather than merely a social media influencer. Countless hours were expended preparing rhetoric concerning climate change, social justice, and the ethical necessity of immediate, bold intervention. She possessed statistics regarding carbon emissions alongside emotional narratives about communities suffering from environmental degradation. She arrived prepared to inspire the audience and argue that only drastic measures could secure the future. However, she was woefully unprepared to face Senator John Kennedy. The 72-year-old Republican from Louisiana resembled everyone's grandfather, wearing a rumpled suit and speaking with an accent suggesting he had just wandered in from a bayou crawfish boil. Upon introducing himself to witnesses, he invariably uttered phrases like, "I am just a simple country lawyer, attempting to grasp the complex topics you intellectuals are discussing." He cultivated a demeanor that made him appear innocuous and deliberately slow, as if struggling to keep pace with sophisticated urbanites and their lofty concepts. What most witnesses failed to realize until it was too late was that John Kennedy was actually a Rhodes Scholar who had studied at Oxford. He held a law degree from the University of Virginia and had practiced for decades before entering the political arena. During that time, he had mastered the art of encouraging hostile witnesses to dismantle their own credibility using their own words. The unsophisticated country lawyer routine was a calculated performance, devastatingly effective because opponents consistently underestimated him until he had already ensnared them. Kennedy spent the morning prior to the hearing reviewing every public declaration AOC had made regarding the Green New Deal, including every promise of job creation and every assertion of feasibility. His team compiled what Kennedy termed his list of simple inquiries, consisting of direct, fundamental questions that any viable policy proposal should easily address. He intended to ask how much it would cost, how many specific jobs would be created, how it would be funded, and where electricity would originate if fossil fuels were eliminated. These queries sounded almost too elementary to pose a threat, which was precisely why they became so perilous when the respondent lacked concrete answers. AOC possessed rehearsed talking points, immense passion, and a righteous conviction shared by millions of followers who clung to her every utterance. However, she completely lacked a spreadsheet, a tangible implementation plan with verifiable numbers, or answers to these basic logistical questions. Senator Kennedy was poised to expose these deficits during the most polite yet destructive 5 minutes of her entire political career. If you have ever pondered the outcome of a confrontation between someone who merely sounds intelligent and someone who actually possesses high intellect, you are about to witness the result. When Kennedy flashed his grandfatherly smile and requested, "I am just trying to understand, so please help me out," the entire country would soon witness the chasm between internet popularity and genuine policy expertise. As AOC became increasingly defensive and flustered, the audience saw the distinction between sounding progressive and actually being prepared, and between a bartender with a degree and a Rhodes Scholar feigning ignorance. The Senate Budget Committee room was packed with nearly 200 individuals, including staff, journalists, lobbyists, and citizens who secured passes for what they assumed would be a mundane hearing. The chamber held the distinct atmosphere of official Washington business, complete with dark wood paneling and stern portraits of former chairmen peering down from the walls. C-SPAN cameras were positioned to capture every second, creating a permanent archive that would remain accessible for eternity. AOC entered the room and took her designated seat at the witness table, appearing poised at 34 years old in a professional ensemble that balanced congressional standards with fashionable flair. She appeared confident and even exhilaratingly eager, viewing this as her defining moment to champion her vision on a national platform. This was her opportunity to prove she belonged in these corridors of power, despite being disregarded by elder politicians as merely a young upstart ignorant of how systems truly function. The hearing commenced with opening statements from committee members, displaying the standard political theater where both sides entrenched their positions before questioning began. Democrats lauded AOC for her audacious vision and moral clarity regarding climate change, while Republicans voiced skepticism concerning the costs and practicality of such a massive economic overhaul. AOC endured the opening remarks with a composed demeanor, occasionally nodding when Democrats offered support and maintaining a neutral expression during Republican critiques. The chairman eventually recognized Senator Kennedy for his allotted 5 minutes, and Kennedy smiled warmly at AOC while shuffling papers to project the image of a kindly old man seeking conversation. Miss Ocasio-Cortez, thank you immensely for being here today, as I truly appreciate you taking the time to testify before our committee. His Louisiana accent was thick and deliberate, with each word drawing out slowly to reinforce his unthreatening persona. I have been reading about your Green New Deal proposal, and I must admit that it sounds incredibly ambitious to transform our entire economy. You aim to rebuild every structure in America and achieve zero emissions within 10 years, which is quite a significant undertaking. He smiled even more genially, acting as though he was genuinely impressed by the scope of her vision. I hope you can assist me here, because I am just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana, and some of this content goes a bit over my head. I am simply trying to comprehend the full magnitude of what we are discussing today. What is the estimated cost of this proposal, just a ballpark figure, so I can wrap my mind around the financial implications? The inquiry sounded innocent enough, almost friendly, appearing to come from a curious senator merely trying to learn. But she should have identified the snare. AOC immediately launched into her prepared talking points regarding how one cannot place a price tag on saving the planet and how inaction would cost far more. She argued that the Green New Deal was truly an investment in America's future rather than an expense one should worry about. Kennedy listened with immense patience, nodding along and maintaining that benevolent grandfatherly expression throughout her speech. When she finally paused, he interjected with that same gentle tone, saying, "Ma'am, I appreciate all that. I really do. Climate change is a serious issue, and nobody is arguing against that fact. But I am asking a much simpler question, if you do not mind." He held up his hand and began counting on his fingers as if he were attempting to solve a rudimentary mathematics problem. "What does your plan actually cost, since you have proposed it and asked us to consider it? You must possess some concept of the numbers we are discussing, so please just help me understand the scale. Is it $10 trillion, $20 trillion, $50 trillion, or what exactly is the ballpark figure?" AOC shifted uncomfortably in her seat, because this line of questioning was not proceeding as she had anticipated. She admitted the costs had not been fully calculated yet, because they were still in the proposal phase. Different economists offered different estimates depending on their assumptions, so she could not provide a single definitive number. Kennedy interrupted gently, noting, "That is what I am hearing from you. You have proposed transforming the entire American economy. Yet, you cannot tell us what the price tag is." She reiterated that estimates varied widely, effectively confirming she did not possess a concrete number. Kennedy's smile never wavered, but his voice adopted a slightly sharper edge while remaining perfectly polite. "Let me ensure I understand this correctly. You want to rebuild every building, replace every car, and completely change electricity generation. You are asking the American people to support this massive change. But when I ask for the cost, you have no answer." He paused to let the implication sink in, and the room fell completely silent. "Ma'am, when I go to the hardware store back home in Louisiana and tell them I want to renovate my house, do you know the first thing they ask me? They ask me what my budget is because you simply cannot renovate a house without knowing what you can afford to spend. It seems to me that is something you might want to figure out before proposing the largest economic transformation in American history." AOC's cheeks flushed as she replied, "Senator, with all due respect, the climate crisis demands bold action." She insisted we cannot let concerns about cost prevent us from doing what is necessary. "I am not trying to prevent anything," Kennedy said, his tone remaining gentle but becoming increasingly firm. "I am just trying to understand what we are being asked to support as legislators. You are a member of Congress, and you hold an economics degree from Boston University. Is that correct? Well then, surely you understand that before you spend money, you need to know how much money you are spending. That is basic economics, yet you cannot tell us the cost, and that concerns me, ma'am. That should concern every American watching this, as you are asking us to support the biggest spending program in human history without knowing its cost." AOC attempted to recover by stating that multiple think tanks have studied this, and costs depend on implementation details. She noted that those think tanks came up with numbers ranging between $50 trillion and $93 trillion over 10 years. Kennedy replied, no longer playing quite as dumb, "That is what they estimated. But you have dismissed those estimates as not being the point, so I am asking what you say the cost is. So I am asking you for the cost, not what the think tanks say, but what you specifically say." The silence that followed was uncomfortable, as AOC did not have an answer. Everyone in that room and everyone watching on C-SPAN could see she lacked a response. She possessed passion and conviction, but lacked numbers. She had a vision, but not a plan. Kennedy let the silence linger for a moment longer than necessary, then moved to his next question, knowing he had scored his first point. It was a simple question regarding cost, yet she did not know, and just wanted to spend money she hadn't counted. Kennedy shifted his papers and his tone became even friendlier, if such a thing were possible. "Let me ask you about something else that has been in the news, if you do not mind. Amazon wanted to build their second headquarters in New York City, bringing 25,000 good-paying jobs. But you opposed it, and they decided to go elsewhere. So can you walk me through your thinking on that decision?" "I am trying to understand the economics of turning down 25,000 jobs." AOC sat up straighter, clearly feeling she was on firmer ground with this topic. She explained Amazon was asking for nearly $3 billion in tax breaks and subsidies. That is $3 billion that could have been better spent on our communities, education, and infrastructure to benefit everyone. Kennedy nodded along as if he were following her logic, asking, "So the tax breaks could be better spent?" "That is what you said at the time, isn't it, that the money could be spent elsewhere?" "Yes, exactly," she confirmed. "Help me understand that," Kennedy said, leaning forward slightly while maintaining his curious grandfather demeanor. "Tax breaks mean you do not collect taxes you normally would, correct?" You are agreeing not to collect certain taxes in exchange for a benefit. So if Amazon doesn't come, do you get that money to spend? Kennedy's question was delivered so gently that it took a moment for the trap to become apparent. AOC hesitated, stating the city wouldn't be giving away $3 billion that could be used for other things. "That is not what I asked," Kennedy said, still smiling but pressing the point. "I asked if Amazon doesn't come, do you get that money to spend on other things, yes or no?" "The tax structure would be different," she started, but he interrupted, asking, "Yes or no, ma'am?" Simple question. If Amazon doesn't build their headquarters in New York, does the city have $3 billion to spend on schools? The silence stretched out as everyone could see AOC struggling with the question. She was realizing, possibly for the first time, that her understanding of the Amazon deal had been fundamentally wrong. "No," she finally admitted quietly. "No," Kennedy repeated, his voice still gentle but now containing an edge of instruction. "Because, see, I think there has been some confusion about how tax breaks actually work. A tax break isn't money you have sitting in a bank account that you can choose to spend on something else. It is money you agree not to collect in the future, so if the company doesn't come, you collect zero. Does that make sense?" AOC looked frustrated now. She tried to argue the point was about corporate welfare, but Kennedy interrupted, saying, "Let's do some simple math together." He actually pulled out a pen and paper like he was going to work through a basic arithmetic problem. Amazon said they would bring $27 billion in economic activity, and the tax breaks were worth $3 billion. So that is $27 billion minus $3 billion, which equals what? $24 billion, AOC said quietly. $24 billion, Kennedy repeated, writing it down on his paper and holding it up like a teacher showing the class. That is how much New York would have gained even after the tax breaks. But Amazon left. So how much does New York get now? He paused, waiting for her to say it. "Nothing," AOC admitted. "Zero," Kennedy said, writing a big zero on his paper. "You turned $24 billion into zero, and 25,000 jobs into zero. All that tax revenue turned into zero, and you did it because you thought tax breaks were money sitting in a bank account. You got an economics degree from Boston University, correct? Very prestigious school, likely costing your parents $60,000 a year, and they didn't teach you the difference between tax breaks and government spending?" The room was dead silent, except for the C-SPAN cameras recording every moment. AOC looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Kennedy's voice became even more gentle, which somehow made it worse. "Ma'am, I am just a simple lawyer from Louisiana, but even I know that $24 billion is better than zero. Those were real jobs for real families and real tax revenue for New York schools and infrastructure. You chased it all away because you didn't understand basic economics. Those families who would have had those good-paying jobs are not better off because of your decision. New York isn't better off, but I guess you felt good about sticking it to Amazon. And maybe that is what matters to you." He shuffled his papers, muttering about moving on since she didn't understand that tax breaks are not spending. "Oh, one more thing has been bothering me. Maybe you can clear this up. I heard you say once that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs. Did I hear that right?" AOC sighed, claiming the statement had been taken out of context. "I am not asking about context yet. I am asking if you said that unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs." "Yes, but the point I was making was about wages," she started. "Help me understand the math on that," Kennedy said, pulling a calculator from his jacket pocket. "If I have 2 jobs, how many times am I counted in the unemployment statistics?" AOC could see where this was going. "Once," she replied. But once, Kennedy repeated. If Senator Durbin over there has 2 jobs, he is counted once. And if everyone in this room has 2 jobs, they are each counted once. So having 2 jobs doesn't make unemployment look lower, does it? That is mathematically impossible. If I work at the Piggly Wiggly in the morning and drive for Uber at night, the Bureau of Labor Statistics counts me as one employed person.
So that cannot be why unemployment is low. Do you see what I am saying? Kennedy's tone was so patient and gentle, like he was explaining basic arithmetic to a child struggling with homework. It made AOC's error seem all the more glaring. I misspoke, AOC said defensively. Everyone makes mistakes, Kennedy nodded, acknowledging that is fair. Everyone does make mistakes, but ma'am, you have an economics degree from Boston University. Your parents spent $240,000 on that education, and you do not know how unemployment statistics are calculated? That is not misspeaking. That is not knowing something fundamental to economics. And that concerns me because you are proposing huge changes to our economy. If you don't know how unemployment works, how can we trust your judgment on economic policy? AOC looked angry now rather than embarrassed. Senator, I think it is clear you are just trying to make me look bad rather than having a genuine conversation. I am not trying to make you look bad, Kennedy said, his voice still maddeningly polite. I am just asking simple questions. You made a statement about unemployment that was factually wrong. That is not me making you look bad. That is me asking you to explain a statement you made. If you cannot explain it, that is not my fault. He glanced at his papers, noting he still had a couple of minutes left. Let us keep going. She said unemployment is low because everyone has 2 jobs, but that is not how statistics work. Kennedy moved to his next topic without giving AOC any time to recover her composure. You support Medicare for all, is that correct? Yes, health care is a human right, and I agree, she responded. Health care is important, Kennedy interrupted gently, but let us talk about the economics. Studies estimate Medicare for all would cost about $32 trillion over 10 years, which is roughly $3.2 trillion per year. How do we pay for that? AOC launched into talking points about taxing the wealthy and corporations and the savings from eliminating private insurance. Kennedy listened with that patient expression, then held up his hand. Let me stop you there and do the math together, if you do not mind. He pulled out his paper and pen again. All the billionaires in America combined are worth about $4.6 trillion total. If we confiscated every penny they have, which we can only do once, that is $4.6 trillion. But Medicare for all costs $32 trillion over 10 years. So that is $4.6 trillion toward a $32 trillion cost. Where does the other $27.4 trillion come from? AOC suggested corporate taxes and wealth taxes on the very wealthy. Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently, even if we taxed every corporation in America at 100% of their profits, and even if we taxed every single person making over $100,000 a year at 100%, we still could not pay for this because the math simply does not work. I am not trying to be difficult. I am just asking where the money comes from. AOC looked frustrated and mentioned that other countries like Canada and the UK make it work. Other countries do not have our population, Kennedy said, counting points on his fingers. They do not spend what we spend on defense, because we defend them. And most importantly, I am not asking about other countries. I am asking about your plan for America. So where does the $32 trillion come from? Show me the math. The silence that followed was uncomfortable for everyone except Kennedy, who sat there patiently waiting for an answer he knew wouldn't come. The details would need to be worked out, AOC finally said. The details, Kennedy repeated. Ma'am, the cost is not a detail. The cost is pretty much the most important thing.
You are proposing the biggest expansion of government in American history and telling me the payment details need to be worked out. That is like me going to the bank asking for a loan to buy a house. And when they ask how I plan to pay it back, I say those details need to be worked out. The bank would not give me that loan. Why should the American people give you $32 trillion without knowing how you will pay for it? His time was almost up, but he pressed one more point. See, this is a pattern I am noticing. Regarding the Green New Deal, you do not know what it costs. With Medicare for All, you do not know how to pay for it. Regarding Amazon, you did not understand basic tax policy. With unemployment, you did not know how it is calculated. Yet, you have an economics degree. You are in Congress making economic policy. And this concerns me, ma'am. It should concern every American watching. You cannot explain how to pay for Medicare for all, because the math does not work. You just want to spend $32 trillion you do not have. Kennedy glanced at the clock and saw he had about 90 seconds left in his 5 minutes. Let me ask about your record real quick. You have been in Congress for about 3 years now. What major legislation have you successfully passed into law? AOC looked caught off guard by the sudden change in direction. I have introduced important legislation and shifted the national conversation on issues, she began. I asked what you have passed, Kennedy said simply, referring to bills that became law. Regarding the Green New Deal, it got 0 votes in the Senate. When it came up for a vote, not a single senator voted for it, not even Democrats. In the House, your own party would not bring it to the floor because they knew it would fail. So that is not passed legislation. That is a failed proposal. AOC tried to pivot to talking about amendments she had introduced and hearings she participated in. She mentioned raising awareness on important issues. Kennedy let her talk for a moment, then cut back in. Ma'am, raising awareness is what social media influencers do. You are a member of Congress, and Congress passes laws. That is the job. Write bills, get them through committee, pass them in the House, hope the Senate passes them, and the President signs them. That is legislating. How many bills have you gotten through that process? The answer was obvious from AOC's silence. None. She had passed nothing of significance. 3 years in Congress, Kennedy said, not bothering to hide his point anymore, and 0 major legislation passed into law. But you have millions of Twitter followers, so I guess that is something. Except Twitter is not the same as governing, and tweeting is not the same as legislating. Being famous is not the same as being effective. He gathered his papers as his time expired. Mr. Chairman, I think I am out of time, but I appreciate Ms. Ocasio-Cortez's testimony today. It has been very illuminating. 3 years in Congress, 0 major laws passed. The chairman thanked Kennedy and moved to recognize the next senator, but Kennedy held up his hand. Mr. Chairman, if I could have just 30 more seconds to make a final point. The chairman nodded, and Kennedy turned to look at AOC. His expression became slightly less grandfatherly and slightly more serious, though still fundamentally respectful in tone. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I want to thank you for your testimony today, and I mean that sincerely. You have been very revealing, just not in the way you probably intended. He paused to let that statement land. You came here to tell us about your Green New Deal and why we should support it. But when I asked you what it costs, you could not tell me. When I asked you about the Amazon decision, you showed you do not understand the difference between tax breaks and government spending. When I asked about unemployment, you showed you do not know how unemployment is calculated. When I asked about Medicare for All, you could not show me the math for how to pay for it. And when I asked about your legislative record, you could not name a single major accomplishment. Kennedy's voice remained gentle, but his words were devastating. "Now I think you are a talented communicator, and you are very good on social media. You know how to get attention and get people excited. Those are real skills, but they are not governing skills. They are marketing skills." He picked up his papers slowly, not rushing. There is a big difference between sounding smart and being smart. There is a difference between talking about big ideas and knowing how to implement them, and between tweeting and legislating. Today, you have shown us which side of those divides you are on. Kennedy stood up, maintaining that courteous Southern gentleman demeanor even while delivering a thorough destruction. "I am just a simple country lawyer from Louisiana, but I know this much. Before you propose transforming the entire American economy, you should probably know what it costs. Before you lecture people about economics, you should probably understand basic economic concepts. Before you tell other people to pay more taxes, you probably shouldn't attend expensive parties wearing dresses that say 'tax the rich.' And before you ask Americans to trust your judgment, you should pass some actual legislation. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, I hope you will go back and do your homework. Figure out what things actually cost, and learn how policies work in practice, not just in theory. Pass some legislation that helps real people, because right now you are all talk and no substance. The American people deserve better than bartender economics from someone with a fancy degree who doesn't understand it." Kennedy nodded to the chairman and yielded back his time. The room erupted. Republicans were applauding enthusiastically while Democrats looked uncomfortable, many clearly agreeing with Kennedy privately. AOC sat at the witness table, looking stunned, angry, and humiliated all at once. She had come expecting to give inspiring testimony about her vision for America. Instead, a 72-year-old senator with a Southern accent had made her look completely unprepared, using nothing but simple questions. The entire thing was on C-SPAN forever, permanently archived for anyone to see what happens when Twitter popularity meets actual policy knowledge. The clip did not just go viral on conservative media platforms, where you would expect it to gain traction. It went absolutely everywhere, crossing partisan and demographic boundaries in ways that political content rarely achieves. Within 12 hours of the hearing ending, the full 5 minutes of Kennedy questioning AOC had been viewed 38 million times. By the 48-hour mark, that number had exploded to over 65 million. Within a week, over 100 million people had watched some version of the exchange. It became one of the most viewed congressional hearing clips in the history of C-SPAN. What made the video spread far beyond typical partisan circles was the nature of Kennedy's questioning and AOC's responses. He had not engaged in personal attacks or ad hominem arguments, nor had he raised his voice even once. He hadn't been disrespectful or dismissive in his tone. He had simply asked basic, straightforward questions that any serious policy proposal should be able to answer. What does this cost? How do you pay for it? And can you explain how this policy works in practice? These were not gotcha questions designed to trap her with obscure details or trick wording. They were fundamental questions about implementation and cost that anyone proposing to transform the American economy should have ready answers for. And AOC, despite her economics degree, 3 years in Congress, and millions of followers, couldn't answer them. That wasn't Kennedy being mean. That was AOC being unprepared. Millions of Americans watching could see the difference clearly, and the "just a simple country lawyer" phrase became an instant cultural phenomenon. Video editors on YouTube and TikTok created elaborate compilation videos showing Kennedy using that humble self-description before demolishing witnesses. The compilations would show his educational credentials as a Rhodes Scholar and Oxford graduate next to footage of him playing the friendly grandfather. The contrast between his actual brilliance and his performed simplicity became a source of endless entertainment and admiration. This was particularly true among younger conservatives who had never paid much attention to Senate hearings before. One particularly viral video intercut Kennedy's questioning of AOC with clips of him questioning other progressive witnesses, all following the same pattern. It showed him starting with the humble routine, asking simple questions, watching the witness struggle, and ending with devastating summations. The video, titled "Senator Kennedy Being a Savage for 10 Minutes Straight," garnered 43 million views. Conservative media outlets played the exchange on an endless loop, emphasizing different aspects of Kennedy's technique. Fox News ran segments with legal experts analyzing his questioning style as a master class in cross-examination. They brought on law professors who taught trial advocacy to explain how Kennedy had used classic courtroom techniques to box AOC in. Sean Hannity dedicated an entire monologue to the exchange, praising Kennedy for doing the job journalists should be doing. Talk radio hosts across the country played the audio of the exchange, sometimes multiple times per show. Rush Limbaugh, in one of his final broadcasts, called it the most devastating 5 minutes of congressional testimony he had ever heard. He praised Kennedy for exposing what he saw as the fundamental emptiness of progressive policy proposals. Local conservative radio hosts used clips from the hearing as intro music, making Kennedy's voice familiar to millions of regular listeners. But the impact wasn't limited to conservative media. Mainstream outlets found themselves unable to ignore the story because the numbers were too massive. CNN covered it extensively, though their analysis tried to be more sympathetic to AOC. Their segments featured progressive commentators who argued that Kennedy had been condescending and dismissive. Some analysts suggested that demanding specific cost figures was a bad faith tactic designed to make ambitious proposals look irresponsible. These defenses mostly fell flat because anyone could watch the actual video and see Kennedy being unfailingly polite. His tone never became mocking or cruel. He never called AOC names or questioned her intelligence directly. The fact that she couldn't provide good answers wasn't his fault, it was hers. MSNBC's coverage was more divided, with some defending AOC and others acknowledging her performance had been problematic. One MSNBC analyst admitted privately that she walked into a trap she built herself. The exchange had immediate and specific policy impacts that went beyond just damaging AOC's personal brand. The Green New Deal, already struggling to gain traction, became completely toxic politically after Kennedy's questioning. Democrats running in competitive House and Senate races wanted nothing to do with it. When asked about climate policy, they would talk in general terms about renewable energy, but studiously avoided mentioning the Green New Deal. The fact that its most prominent advocate couldn't answer basic questions made association with it politically dangerous. Campaign strategists working for moderate Democrats began actively advising their candidates to distance themselves from AOC and her proposals. Internal polling showed that in swing districts, AOC's brand had become a liability rather than an asset. Voters in these districts found Kennedy's questions compelling and AOC's inability to answer them troubling. They wanted bold action on climate change, but also wanted to know it was financially feasible. Kennedy had raised reasonable doubts about whether AOC's proposal met those criteria. Medicare for All also suffered collateral damage from the exchange, even though it wasn't specifically AOC's legislation. Kennedy's simple question about how to pay for $32 trillion resonated powerfully with voters who worried about practical realities. Progressive candidates campaigning on Medicare for All found themselves facing more skeptical questions from voters and journalists. The days of advocating for it purely on moral grounds without defending the economics were over. Kennedy had made the details matter in a way they hadn't before. The Amazon example became particularly damaging to AOC's credibility on economic issues because Kennedy explained the difference between tax breaks and spending so clearly. The fact that AOC, who held an economics degree, hadn't understood that difference made her look either genuinely ignorant or deliberately dishonest. Defenders of the Amazon deal in New York felt vindicated after being attacked for opposing AOC's campaign. Local New York news outlets revisited the story, interviewing experts who explained what the city had lost. Kennedy had made the argument in the starkest possible terms. She turned billions into zero. Perhaps most significantly for AOC personally, her entire political brand took a major hit that would prove difficult to recover from. She had built her persona on being the smart young progressive who would shake up the establishment with intellectual rigor. Kennedy's 5 minutes of simple questions had shattered that image completely. He exposed that she might be good at social media, but was not well informed on policy implementation. Maybe the economics degree was just a credential that didn't translate to practical understanding. For weeks afterward, anytime AOC gave a speech or interview, someone would inevitably ask her to clarify costs or provide numbers. She clearly hated it, having gotten used to speaking in broad, inspirational terms without defending the details. Kennedy himself became a viral sensation in a way that surprised many people. Young conservatives started sharing his questioning techniques as models for how to debate progressives. "Just ask them what it costs" became a standard response to ambitious proposals. "Show me the math" started appearing on T-shirts and memes, and Kennedy's office was flooded with requests for him to question other politicians. He leaned into it, making a point of asking similar simple questions of other witnesses in subsequent hearings. The simple country lawyer routine became his brand, and it was devastatingly effective because he had proven it worked. He could make smart people look foolish without ever being rude. 6 months after the hearing, AOC's polling numbers showed the damage. Her favorability ratings had dropped 12 points among independents, and moderate party members increasingly saw her as a liability. The video became standard opposition research material used against her. More importantly, AOC seemed genuinely rattled by the experience in a way that changed her public behavior. She became notably more cautious about making specific policy claims and relied more heavily on prepared statements. The confidence and swagger that had marked her early years were tempered by the recognition that she had been exposed. The ultimate irony was that Kennedy's performance wasn't particularly complex or difficult to replicate. He hadn't used some sophisticated rhetorical technique, he just asked simple questions and insisted on getting answers. Any competent questioner could do the same thing if they prepared properly. That is what made the whole exchange so memorable and so damaging. The fact that AOC couldn't answer revealed a fundamental lack of preparation that no amount of media savvy could compensate for. This wasn't a debate between competing policy visions. This was a Rhodes Scholar disguised as a country lawyer exposing a bartender with an economics degree. This was preparation meeting popularity and revealing the difference. John Kennedy had spent hours going through AOC's public statements and identifying claims she couldn't back up. He had prepared simple questions and practiced his delivery. AOC had prepared talking points and assumed her fame would carry her through. The exchange proved something important about political communication in the social media age. Twitter followers and viral videos can make you influential, but they are not a substitute for knowing what you are talking about. None of that prepares you to answer simple questions about cost and consequences. Kennedy showed that you don't need to yell or insult people to expose their lack of preparation. You just need to ask simple questions and refuse to accept non-answers. What does it cost? How will you pay for it? Where is your evidence? And can you explain this basic concept? AOC couldn't explain costs because she'd never calculated them, And she couldn't defend the Amazon decision because she didn't understand tax breaks. She couldn't explain unemployment statistics because she made claims without checking if they were actually true. She couldn't show how to pay for Medicare for all because she assumed passion was enough without a realistic funding plan. She couldn't point to legislative accomplishments because she spent her time on Twitter instead of actually legislating. Kennedy's 5 minutes of questioning exposed all of that with devastating clarity while he remained unfailingly polite. He spoke slowly with his Louisiana accent, maintaining his simple country lawyer persona right up until the very end. He delivered that final summation, which left no doubt that he knew exactly what he had done and why. If you think policies should have answers to basic questions about cost and implementation, then you should share this story. If you believe an economics degree should mean you actually understand economics, you should share this story. If you think Twitter followers are not the same thing as governing competence, then you should definitely share this story. Senator Kennedy proved that simple questions can expose everything when the person being questioned has not done their homework. It serves as a stark reminder that substance matters more than style in the halls of government. Ultimately, the exchange demonstrated that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is play dumb. It allows you to let someone expose themselves effectively with their own words.